I have a big stack of books here that I have loved, and I'm going to give you one quick sentence about each of these books, and I want you to tell me in the comments if you think they sound boring to you. I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to spoil the plot twist of this video right now because my fear is that you're going to click away and you will get the wrong impression of what I'm trying to say here. The whole point of this video is to celebrate the fact that what I find desperately boring in a novel might just be the thing that is incredibly exciting to you, and vice versa. And because there are so many new folks who have joined recently, I thought it might be useful to talk through some of the books that have really excited me over the past couple years and talk about why they've excited me, and one book in particular that I finished recently, why this particular book was exciting to me and what it is I look for in a book to know that I'm not going to be bored by that book. In one quick sentence each, here are some descriptions of books that I have greatly admired recently. All of the titles, authors, translators, and publishers will be listed in the description below. A heist novel about a plot to steal 1 million chickens from a factory farm in one night. 2 Sherpas lean over a cliff on Mount Everest, staring down at their British employer who has just fallen over, said Cliff. The novel begins there, and the novel ends there. A guild of gravediggers in France make a deal with the devil that no one will die for 3 whole days so that the gravediggers can have their annual banquet and not have to worry about going to work. A taxi driver in 1970s Washington, D.C. drives a 1967 Plymouth, and there is a ghost that lives in the trunk. A novel that opens with a woman giving birth in the middle of a snowstorm in rural Turkey. A novel narrated by a ball, literally a sphere, narrated by a sphere that is floating 6 inches above the head of a Japanese man. A volcano begins to grow in the middle of Central Park in New York City, and instead of panicking, or in addition to panicking, of course, because it's America, companies start building billboards on the side of the volcano. Of course they would. A cosmetic mortician grieves her mother's death by joining the local BDSM community. In an unnamed city, it's snowing and the snow is not stopping over months and months and months, and there's a box. Somebody drops the box. Nobody knows what's in the box. Nobody knows how to open the box. It's made out of paper. Everybody wants the box, but no one can find the box. It's about a box. I had a conversation recently with a group of writers I meet with monthly, and every month at the end of our conversation we all ask each other what we are reading, because as writers we are all also first and foremost readers. And a new person had joined the group, and so we had gotten to that point, the end of the meeting, where we all were sharing what we've been reading, and I started to share, what I had been reading recently, and another writer in the group just kind of stopped everyone and said, "Just so you know, Sarah always has the craziest books to tell us about. She reads the weirdest things." And I realized that it's true. I tend to read books that are fun to tell other people about, because the reaction is always, "Wait, what?" So I want you to tell me in the comments what bores you in a book. Do you have a handle on what bores you in a book generally? And how do you set yourself up for success in avoiding those books that do bore you? Do you think there are times where it is important to continue reading a book that you might find boring in that moment? Maybe it's not every day, maybe it's not every book, but what are the unique circumstances that you might continue reading a book that's boring to you? Also, I'm using the word boring here. I don't love that word. It's just the first word that came to mind when I thought about making this video, and I'm open to alternatives. Tedious, dull, uninteresting, books that are uninteresting to you, books that just aren't up your alley, books that don't give you that spark of excitement. To me, that kind of all boils down to boring right now, and I had to get this video going and posted, so we're gonna go with boring for now, knowing that there are probably better words out there. I am delighted to say that I think I have figured out exactly what bores me in a novel, or more precisely, I have figured out exactly what excites me in a novel, and therefore can weed out all of the other books that I know probably aren't going to excite me. If you've been here before, then you know what I'm going to say. You know where I tend to find the kind of books that excite me. I tend to love books published by small literary publishers. Nonprofit and independent presses publish the kind of books that I love to read. They publish the kind of authors that are writing the kind of quirky, weird, mind-blowing, boundary-pushing, head-scratching novels that I love. Case in point, I recently read a zombie apocalypse novel written from the zombie's perspective. This is It Lasts Forever and Then It's Over by Anne DeMarkin, and this edition is published by New Directions. This was the winner of, I think, the 2022 Novel Prize, which is a prize for books that kind of push the form of the novel and do new things with the form of the novel. And it is a prize that's administered by 3 publishers: New Directions in the US, Fitzcarraldo in the UK, and Garamondo in Australia. And then the winners of the prize, this was the co-winner. There were two winners this year, or for that year. And the winner is published by all 3 publishers. So again, this is the New Directions edition of the novel. And I'm going to read the first paragraph. I lost my left arm today. It came off clean at the shoulder. Janice too picked it up and brought it back to the hotel. I would have thought it would affect my balance more than it has. It is like getting a haircut. The air moving differently around the remaining parts of me. Also by turns a sense of newness and lessness. Free me, undead me, don't look at me. The strangest thing about this strange little novel is that nowhere in the description or the blurbs is the word zombie mentioned. I'm just checking to make sure that that's true. Yeah, because I was really surprised when I started reading and I kept asking myself, this is about zombies, right? I'm not making this up. And I would go back and I would look like there's nothing about zombies, but this is about zombies. Yeah, it is definitely about zombies, and it is definitely from a zombie's perspective. There is no doubt about that. And I questioned whether I should reveal that here in this video because it's obviously purposeful that they don't say in the description that this is about zombies. But I'm wondering if they thought that would turn people away. But if I had read that this was a zombie novel from the zombie's perspective, I would have bought it sooner than I even did. I feel like that would be appealing. So I'm telling you that this is about zombies and it's from a zombie's perspective. In the opening, the narrator is living in this hotel where a lot of other zombies are living, and it's clearly an apocalyptic situation. All these zombies in this hotel are trying to come to terms with their new reality, with their new identity, with their new bodies, each in their own way, including the narrator is in her own way trying to come to terms with the fact that she is now a zombie. There's a character who's kind of a cult religious figure who's trying to organize them around this new identity of being a zombie, and there are characters who try to end their lives. I don't know if you can call it lives. It's rather difficult since they're not alive, but they don't want to continue in this existence, so they try to end it. There are incredibly disturbing encounters with the living. Disturbing encounters because the zombies are obviously a threat to the living, but the living, now that we're in the zombies' perspective, the living are absolutely a threat to the zombies as well. A lot of this is about identity, as I mentioned. Most of the zombies don't retain any memories. They might retain 1 or 2 memories, and they obsess over those 1 or 2 memories that they still have, but they don't even know if those memories are real or if those memories are their own memories, but they are all they have, and so they obsess over them. The narrator herself is continually thinking about a loved one that she has lost. We don't know what happened to the loved one. She doesn't know what happened to the loved one, but she's constantly thinking about that loved one. Most of them can't even remember their own names, and so they give themselves names. One very funny part in here where the narrator says, "Isn't it strange that I never knew a single living Janice, and now I know 3. So there's Janice 1, Janice 2, and Janice 3 living in this hotel. This book is very philosophical and intellectual. It's really funny in parts, but also very sad and very moving. The narrator is seeking something. You can feel it. There is a momentum. The narrator is being pushed towards something. It's not super clear what the goal is, what the narrator is moving toward, but there is definitely a momentum and eventually a journey that the narrator goes on. I listened to an amazing interview with the author on my favorite podcast, Between the Covers. The host is David Naiman. And so I wanted to bring some of that conversation here into this video because it was so interesting, and I'll leave a link to it below. Highly recommend checking it out. So one of the things that David Naiman does on his podcast Between the Covers is he's doing an interview with a specific author, but then he will bring in other authors to record questions for that author. He asked the writer Sabrina Ora-Mark to ask a question for Anne DeMarkin. And so then he plays that recording of Sabrina asking the question to Anne. And Sabrina's question was, I think what drew me to this novel most intensely is how your composition relies on a decomposition. Like first, something needs to be erased, forgotten, or smudged in order for a story to grow like seeds that need to be burned in order to germinate. I loved that observation that this is a novel where the composition is relying on decomposition. I love that thought just in general, and that the narrator kind of needs to be smudged out slowly and losing parts in order to actually build what becomes the novel. Later in the interview, the author talks about multiplicity and how important multiplicity is to her. She's trying to tell one story with this novel, but wants to acknowledge and make it clear that there isn't ever only one story ever. There are always many, many stories happening all at once and in contradiction to each other. You know, a novel is one story, but how can one story contain and point to the fact that there are always many infinite stories? How can a novel show that? And in the interview, the author says, you can't say everything, and I don't want to say everything. It's hard enough to just say this one thing. But in saying this one thing, I don't want to suggest that it's the one thing. So I thought this was interesting, this whole idea of multiplicity, but then also the idea of decomposition were interesting to kind of tie together, because in that interview, they also talk about how we humans are not just one organism. We think of ourselves as one organism, but we're made up of many organisms down to our very cells. And still we act like we are one organism. And that's just like a novel acts like it's one story when it contains many other stories, and also ignoring many other stories. Just in order to be a novel, it has to pretend it is one story when it's not necessarily the one story. But the process of decomposition erases that mistaken notion that we are one thing, because by decomposing, we are returning like into multiple things, because we're decomposing, or not like returning to, but revealing the fact that we are not just one thing. You know, everything is coming apart, and like the narrator in this novel, everything is coming apart and breaking into multiple parts, decomposing from one into many, or getting rid of that illusion of being one thing. And like I said, that indeed happens to the narrator. The one, the self, the narrator, starts to split off into different parts, and she tries desperately throughout the whole novel to keep herself together, because she has this illusion that she's one thing. That's the piece of her former living life that she desperately wants to hang on to, that oneness, that being one thing. She's desperate to maintain that. And I think maybe that's what identity is, or maybe that's what the novel is saying identity is. Identity is clinging to the belief that you are one thing. This is your identity. This is your one thing. So the result is a novel that feels like it has lots of holes. You don't know what's going on. It definitely points to many infinite stories going on outside this one narrator's experience. You don't know why the apocalypse has happened. You don't know what's going on with the living humans across the globe. You really have no concept throughout the whole novel of anything else beyond this one zombie's experience. So, not boring. To me, not boring. But here's the thing. This novel might be boring to you. This is a very literary novel. It's very dreamy. It's, I guess, lyrical, though I don't necessarily know if I fully understand what a lyrical novel is. But I would say maybe it would be this. It doesn't give you hardly any answers about what's actually going on in this apocalypse. Plot is not its main concern. Character development is there, but maybe not in the traditional way that you would see in other literary novels. It's much more subtle, I think. But you might be someone who is excited by really deep character development, or you might be someone who loves a really well-crafted plot or like a twisty plot. You might not like unexplained things going on in your fiction, and this novel might bore you to pieces. This was super exciting to me. I loved this book, but I don't think this book is for everybody. The point is, obviously, that what is boring to you might not be boring to me, and what is boring to me might be really exciting to you. That's just kind of the beauty of taste. I think that's a beautiful thing, actually. I'll tell you one more thing that bores me to tears. Perfect books. I can't give you an example because I don't think a perfect book exists. I assume that a perfect book does not exist. I'm sure there are people out there who would claim that some classic works of literature are examples of perfect books, and you are welcome to make that argument. But it boggles my mind a little bit when I see a reviewer, I guess, but not boggles my mind. It's just not my experience. Like, I don't feel this way, but I see other people feeling disappointed when they have read a novel and they say, like, I would have loved this except for this one flaw. Like, otherwise I would have loved this book, but it had this one flaw. I am reminded of one of my husband's and my all-time favorite television quotes that we quote to each other constantly. The quote is from the TV show Frasier, and we love Frasier. But Frasier and Niles are talking about a meal that they had at a restaurant. And Niles says, "It was an exquisite meal, marred only by the lack of even one outstanding cognac on their carte de digestif." And Frasier says back to Niles, "Yes, but think of it this way, Niles. What is the one thing better than an exquisite meal? An exquisite meal with one tiny flaw we can pick at all night." That's how I feel about books. None of the books I listed at the beginning are perfect books. They all have flaws. Some of them have major, major flaws. But I think about those books all the time. And I honestly don't think I would think about them as much if they were like perfect. Like I need that like roughness or rawness a little bit in the books I read. It helps. I don't know. There's something about that makes a book more memorable for me. Before I've read a book, how do I know that I'm gonna pick up a book and it's not gonna bore me? For me, I think it all comes down to reading a premise of a book or being told about a book and thinking, how are they gonna pull that off? Hearing something crazy and weird and different and just wanting to know how they pull it off. And that's what it excites me. I want to know how the author does it. I want to know what you think is not boring. Is it character development? Is it plot? Is it like a setting that is somewhere that is far flung from where you live? Is it somewhere back in history? Like, a novel that takes you back to a time that you haven't lived through. There are so many things that I think people look for in what they read, and I want to know what yours is. And again, tell me those circumstances where you think it's important to continue reading a book that is boring you. Maybe you're at a point in your life where I kind of feel like I'm at that point now, where you don't have time for books that bore you. It's not what you're going to do right now. Or maybe you do find that you have certain reasons for reading a book that is not at the top of your list of what excites you in a book. Maybe. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Sarah, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.